At that meeting, the ministers heard directly from Bank of Canada Governor Tiff Macklem and from Canada-U.S. Trade Minister Dominic LeBlanc for an update on the review of the North American Free Trade Deal. Joining me now is the host of that meeting, François-Philippe Champagne, the Minister of Finance and National Revenue. Minister, it's good to see you. Thank you for coming in.
It's good to be with you on a busy day.
I wonder what you can tell us about the update you and Minister LeBlanc were able to give the provinces on the state of talks with the U.S. today.
Well, it's front and center, not just for the ministers, but for Canadian industry, for Canadian workers, Canadian families. We had a good update from Minister LeBlanc. He just gave us a bit the state of play in the way that, things are complex. I think Canadians have understood that. But also looking what happened with our colleagues in Mexico, the discussion in the United States. I mean, the focus today was really to see what's coming, but also to focus on what we can control. The Prime Minister said, right. There's one thing we have learned, there's volatility. We can't change necessarily policy south of the border, but what we can do is to build one economy, be our own best customers, making sure we remove interprovincial barriers to trade. So Minister LeBlanc brought us to that as well, to make sure that this morning, you should have seen, I wish you would have been there, because there was a, unity in purpose, unity in vision, unity in action. What we need now is speed and scale. Get the work done, because there's a bit of headwind, not just for Canada, but the world. And therefore, I think we're better placed than most. I mean, we have the lowest price to enter the U.S. market. But obviously, if you're in the steel sector in Hamilton, or if you're an auto worker in Oshawa, or in the lumber industry in Kitimat, or in Letsuk in my own riding, you don't feel the same way. So in a way, we said, let's focus on what we can control, make sure we take the action needed. But at the same time, obviously, what we want is to make sure we get prepared for the review of the CUSMA agreement.
But on the talks, from the outside, it looks absolutely stuck. I mean, we know the Prime Minister met with President Sheinbaum and President Trump in Washington, D.C., but it seems like it's all going to be pushed off, the sectoral tariff conversations, to the CUSMA review. That's what Ambassador Hillman suggested as part of the reason why she's leaving. Is that where things are? Has anything fundamentally changed since the D.C. meeting?
Let's be honest. Like I said, we have the lowest price to enter the U.S. market, 5.3%. 85% of our trade is covered by the exemption. What we're trying to do now is sectorial deals, if you want, with the U.S. administration, making sure they understand that we are so integrated in the economy that would be to our mutual benefit. So discussions are ongoing. But I think one thing we've learned, and if you want to take a bit of perspective, I was thinking about that. This is the end of the first quarter of the 21st century. So you have to take a bit of step back. We're getting to the end of the year. And what we have seen as a people is that the speed, scale, and scope of change is quite unprecedented. And it's not only trade, it's geopolitics, it's supply chain, it's technology, quantum, and AI. So what you're saying is that there's a bit of headwind, but why makes, I'm so confident. And this week I hosted a G7 finance minister meeting. We had the colleagues this morning. And as when you compare Canada to others, we have strong foundation. We're a big magnet for talent. We're one of the very few countries in the world which build planes, which build cars, build ships. We have a leading edge in AI. We have critical minerals. We have abundance of energy, and we're the only G7 with a free trade with all the other G7. So my point is that there's a bit of headwind.
Sure.
We're seeing that, but I think we're better placed than most, and we've been blessed by geography, because we still have access to the largest market in the world.
You said a second ago, Minister, discussions are ongoing. I mean, Donald Trump said he was ending all trade talks. So beyond informal touching base, is there any actual tangible progress being made on the sectoral issues with the United States?
Well, I mean, what you want is to engage. I engaged with my counterpart. Secretary Besson was with me. We were on the phone as part of the G7, for almost 2 hours earlier this week. We engaged. The Prime Minister, as you've seen, was with the President recently. So these are very important discussions, because you have the formal discussion, but I would say the informal aspect of it, where we keep in touch, where we say, listen, we are partnering together. For example, in the G7, everyone would agree that Canada, through our chairmanship of the G7, have been very helpful in advancing a number of things. But at the same time, we take the opportunity to talk about our bilateral relationship and make sure that our colleagues understand, the nexus between, I would say, energy security, economic security, and national security, and how Canada can be that great partner. And I can tell you, people around the world see it. You've seen a number of people. We had the King and Queen of Sweden that came here. We had people from the from other countries in Europe. Holland came to see us, from the royal family, said we'd like to do more. The Prime Minister was in the Middle East. I mean, people value, I would say, Canada in a sense, stability, predictability, rule of law, Canadian values. We just have to make sure that, we kind of sell our story to the world. Not everyone wakes up in the morning in the world thinking about Canada. But as you come to the end of the first quarter of the 21st century, you look back and you say the world has changed in quite an unprecedented way. But I think Canada is in a good position for the second quarter of that century to succeed in a very different world.
Look, there's no question the fundamentals are broadly strong, and these other countries are interested in doing business, but you could stack them all together, and the economies won't add up to the United States, right? This is one of the challenges, like unless we talk about China and India and different things. But because you talked today, and you mentioned in the interview about we still have the lowest price of entry into the U.S. market because of the broad exemptions that still exist under CUSMA. But when you look at what Jamieson Greer has been saying this week, a couple of days this week, a couple of senior members of the administration talking about maybe exiting CUSMA, renegotiating CUSMA. There's a different partnership with Canada and the U.S. than there is with Mexico and the U.S., and maybe things need to be split into bilateral deals. I mean, what's the contingency plan and the view of what that could mean for the economy should the U.S. go in that route in 2026?
Well, I would say we need to keep our cool. We've learned that we've gone through a lot. I mean, listen, I was Foreign Affairs Minister during the first Trump administration. You see that today. And it's not unique to Canada. That's why I want to reassure Canadians. That's why I'm confident, that our strategy, in my view, has been the right one. Some have gone faster to do deals, but we all know what it means today. I mean, you have an administration that may change in terms of their policy, of their approach. I think ours, to be able to negotiate the lowest price of entry, if I may call it this way, into the U.S. market, is still giving Canada a preferential treatment. But like I said, what is very challenging is that the impact of the tariff is very felt, by sector, by industry, by region. Like I said, if you're in the steel industry, you don't feel the same way. If you're a fisher in the Atlantic coast or a canola farmer in the West, you say, wow, I don't feel this way. So that's why we've been there to support workers, to support industry, to pivot, because the real thing is that we just need to move from reliance to resilience. The Prime Minister said, if you have overseas trade that goes from $300 billion to $600 billion in a decade, we just need to diversify. I mean, it's true in financial matters. It's true in trade as well. We have been reliant, because of our geography, to the deepest customer market in the world for decades. And now I think what we've learned to that, as I call it, the first quarter of the 21st century, is that, we are well advised to diversify, fix things in our country, invest in ourselves, make sure, because that's the best way forward. We'll always trade with the Americans. We'll see what they want. The
self-reliance, the resilience, and the diversification. I mean, it makes total sense. But I guess I wonder, with these latest musings coming out of Washington, are you worried they're going to tear this thing up when it gets to that July 1 deadline?
Listen, we've been trading with the Americans for well over a century. And, you had the Auto Pact, then you had when we did the first free trade agreement. I am confident we'll find a way. And particularly on a sectorial basis, because that seems to be the way that the U.S. administration is looking at that. But like I said, at the same time we do that, we should not, and that's why we had the finance ministers from the province and territories. There's a lot that we can do at home, which that's the important work we're doing now. For the rest, we'll continue to engage with our U.S. partner. And one thing that you've seen, and I think folks who are watching at home, they've seen that our friends down south have conducted a lot of these negotiations in the public. Yeah. And I think it gave an appreciation for people at home to say how complex this could be. And not unique to Canada. I mean, people have seen a number of these meetings play out in a very public way.
And I think it gave way, I would say.
Well, I would say very public. That's what, but it gave an appreciation for people and Canadians to say, okay, this is a new reality. It's never going to be the same. So therefore, what do we do? And that's why I come in. We'll continue the engagement, which we need to do, but at the same time, a lot of work to be done at home.
Okay, I want to ask you a question just about your budget, because in your budget speech and in the budget itself, you quoted the IMF quite a bit, saying, praising Canada for using its fiscal space amidst uncertainty. Another IMF report came out this month suggesting that maybe you need to re-adopt the fiscal anchor based on debt to GDP, which you moved away from in this particular budget. And the IMF is saying it will ensure investments are sustainable and credible. Will you take their advice and return to that over time?
Well, I met them before, so I'm very aware of what you're talking about. I think, you know, well, that's part of the report. What they were saying is Canada is a very stable place.
Sure.
Canada has the fiscal capacity. They compare us to Germany. What they were saying is that as we present the numbers, that's something that they say we could consider as well. But they realize that, you know, one of the anchor we have is to make sure that we would balance our operating budget with revenues by 2029. And I think that, if you go back to, you may remember Kevin Page, who was a former parliamentary budget officer, when you look at the federal budget, said, you know, he gave us good mark when he said about the vision, the transparency, and the fiscal anchors, because he said, in a way, when you say you're going to balance your operating budget with revenues, that's also very, you know, it's a set of constraints, you know, because that means what you borrow after that is for capital growth. So on balance, you know, that's why we listen, obviously, to the IMF. We listen to Kevin Page, what he said. And I think overall what they gave is to the market that Canada is a very fiscally prudent country, and we have the wherewithal to invest.
But are you being a bit selective in the advice you take from the IMF? They praised you for having the fiscal capacity and using it to deal with the uncertainty, but you know, when they say this would be a much better way to do your fiscal anchors, you kind of move past it a bit.
I don't think they say it's a much better way. I think, go back to the wording of it.
Ensure investments are, quote, sustainable and credible.
Well, they said you should consider something, which more. And you know, considering is good. But I would say it's something when you look at the fiscal position of Canada. And next week I'm going to be in Europe to talk to investors in London. And in Paris as well, to make the case for Canada. But I think you have seen, if you look at the bond market, you would see that the market has reacted very well to Canada. And I think, and you know what I said to them as well is that, and I just want to give you that in sense of perspective. If you look again to the International Monetary Fund, they produce something called the World Uncertainty Index. Right. And the uncertainty index shows now that there's more uncertainty in the world in 2025 than in 2008 during the financial crisis. So my point is that you have to also be humble when you are in the world of, you know, heightened uncertainty, to say that you need to have a bit of flexibility to make sure you do the investment to grow the economy. I think it's something they understand. Okay. Well, Minister, we appreciate your time on a busy day. I know you had a long day. As Finance Minister François-Philippe Champagne, you have a good holiday, and we'll see you in the new year. Thank you, sir. Happy holidays to you, your family. Thank you.